Astounding news by express via Norfolk. The Atlantic crossed in 3 days. Signal triumph of Mr. Monk Mason's flying machine. Arrival at Sullivan's Island near Charleston, South Carolina of Mr. Mason, Mr. Robert Holland, Mr. Henson, Mr. Harrison Ainsworth, and 4 others in the steering balloon Victoria after a passage of 75 hours from land to land. Full particulars of the voyage. The subjoined jeu d'esprit, with the preceding heading in magnificent capitals well interspersed with notes of admiration, was originally published as matter of fact in the New York Sun, a daily newspaper, and therein fully subserved the purpose of creating indigestible alignment for the quidnuncs during the few hours intervening between a couple of Charleston mails. The rush for the sole paper which had the news was something beyond even the prodigious. And in fact, if, as some assert, the Victoria did not absolutely accomplish the voyage recorded, it will be difficult to assign a reason why she should not have accomplished it. The great problem is at length solved. The air, as well as the earth and the ocean, has been subdued by science, and will become a common and convenient highway for mankind. The Atlantic has been actually crossed in a balloon, and this too without difficulty, without any great apparent danger, with thorough control of the machine, and in the inconceivably brief period of 75 hours from shore to shore. By the energy of an agent at Charleston, South Carolina, we are enabled to be the first to furnish the public with a detailed account of this most extraordinary voyage, which was performed between Saturday, the 6th instant, at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 9th instant, by Sir Everard Bringhurst, Mr. Osborne, a nephew of Lord Bentinck, Mr. Monk Mason, and Mr. Robert Holland, the well-known aeronauts, Mr. Harrison Ainsworth, author of Jack Sheppard, etc., and Mr. Henson, the projector of the late unsuccessful flying machine, with 2 seamen from Woolwich, in all 8 persons. The particulars furnished below may be relied on as authentic and accurate in every respect, as, with a slight exception, they are copied verbatim from the joint diaries of Mr. Monk Mason and Mr. Harrison Ainsworth, to whose politeness our agent is also indebted for much verbal information respecting the balloon itself, its construction, and other matters of interest. The only alteration in the MS received has been made for the purpose of throwing the hurried account of our agent, Mr. Forsyth, into a connected and intelligible form. The balloon. 2 very decided failures of late, those of Mr. Henson and Sir George Cayley, had much weakened the public interest in the subject of aerial navigation. Mr. Henson's scheme, which at first was considered very feasible even by men of science, was founded upon the principle of an inclined plane, started from an eminence by an extrinsic force, applied and continued by the revolution of impinging vanes in form and number resembling the vanes of a windmill, but in all the experiments made with models at the Adelaide Gallery, it was found that the operation of these fans not only did not propel the machine, but actually impeded its flight. The only propelling force it ever exhibited was the mere impetus acquired from the descent of the inclined plane, and this impetus carried the machine farther when the vanes were at rest than when they were in motion, a fact which sufficiently demonstrates their inutility. And in the absence of the propelling, which was also the sustaining power, the whole fabric would necessarily descend. This consideration led Sir George Cayley to think only of adapting the propeller to some machine having of itself an independent power of support, in a word, to a balloon. The idea, however, being novel or original, with Sir George only so far as regards the mode of its application to practice, he exhibited a model of his invention at the Polytechnic Institution. The propelling principle, or power, was here also applied to interrupted surfaces, or vanes, put in revolution. These vanes were 4 in number, but were found entirely ineffectual in moving the balloon, or in aiding its ascending power. The whole project was thus a complete failure. It was at this juncture that Mr. Monk Mason, whose voyage from Dover to Weilburg in the balloon Nassau occasioned so much excitement in 1837, conceived the idea of employing the principle of the Archimedean screw for the purpose of propulsion through the air, rightly attributing the failure of Mr. Henson's scheme and of Sir George Cayley's to the interruption of surface in the independent vanes. He made the first public experiment at Willis's Rooms, but afterward removed his model to the Adelaide Gallery. Like Sir George Cayley's balloon, his own was an ellipsoid. Its length was 13 feet 6 inches, height 6 feet 8 inches. It contained about 320 cubic feet of gas, which, if pure hydrogen, would support 21 pounds upon its first inflation, before the gas has time to deteriorate or escape. The weight of the whole machine and apparatus was 17 pounds, leaving about 4 pounds to spare. Beneath the center of the balloon was a frame of light wood about 9 feet long and rigged on to the balloon itself with a network in the customary manner. From this framework was suspended a wicker basket or car. The screw consists of an axis of hollow brass tube 18 inches in length, through which, upon a semi-spiral inclined at 15 degrees, pass a series of steel wire radii 2 feet long, and thus projecting a foot on either side. These radii are connected at the outer extremities by 2 bands of flattened wire, the whole in this manner forming the framework of the screw, which is completed by a covering of oiled silk cut into gores and tightened so as to present a tolerably uniform surface. At each end of its axis, this screw is supported by pillars of hollow brass tube descending from the hoop. In the lower ends of these tubes are holes in which the pivots of the axis revolve. From the end of the axis, which is next the car, proceeds a shaft of steel connecting the screw with the pinion of a piece of spring machinery fixed in the car. By the operation of this spring, the screw is made to revolve with great rapidity, communicating a progressive motion to the whole. By means of the rudder, the machine is readily turned in any direction. The spring was of great power compared with its dimensions, being capable of raising 45 pounds upon a barrel of 4 inches diameter after the first turn, and gradually increasing as it was wound up. It weighed altogether 8 pounds 6 ounces. The rudder was a light frame of cane covered with silk shaped somewhat like a battledore, and was about 3 feet long, and at the widest 1 foot. Its weight was about 2 ounces. It could be turned flat and directed upward or downward, as well as to the right or left, and thus enabled the aeronaut to transfer the resistance of the air, which in an inclined position it must generate in its passage, to any side upon which he might desire to act, thus determining the balloon in the opposite direction. This model, which through want of time we have necessarily described in an imperfect manner, was put in action at the Adelaide Gallery, where it accomplished a velocity of 5 miles per hour, although strange to say it excited very little interest in comparison with the previous complex machine of Mr. Henson. So resolute is the world to despise anything which carries with it an air of simplicity. To accomplish the great desideratum of aerial navigation, it was very generally supposed that some exceedingly complicated application must be made of some unusually profound principle in dynamics. So well satisfied, however, was Mr. Mason of the ultimate success of his invention that he determined to construct immediately, if possible, a balloon of sufficient capacity to test the question by a voyage of some extent, the original design being to cross the British Channel, as before in the Nassau balloon. To carry out his views, he solicited and obtained the patronage of Sir Everard Bringhurst and Mr. Osborne, 2 gentlemen well known for scientific acquirement, and especially for the interest they have exhibited in the progress of aerostation. The project, at the desire of Mr. Osborne, was kept a profound secret from the public, the only persons entrusted with the design being those actually engaged in the construction of the machine, which was built under the superintendence of Mr. Mason, Mr. Holland, Sir Everard Bringhurst, and Mr. Osborne, at the seat of the latter gentleman near Penstruthal in Wales. Mr. Henson, accompanied by his friend Mr. Ainsworth, was admitted to a private view of the balloon on Saturday last, when the two gentlemen made final arrangements to be included in the adventure. We are not informed for what reason the two seamen were also included in the party, but in the course of a day or two we shall put our readers in possession of the minutest particulars respecting this extraordinary voyage. The balloon is composed of silk, varnished with the liquid gum caoutchouc. It is of vast dimensions, containing more than 40,000 cubic feet of gas, but as coal gas was employed in place of the more expensive and inconvenient hydrogen, the supporting power of the machine, when fully inflated, and immediately after inflation, is not more than about 2,500 pounds. The coal gas is not only much less costly, but is easily procured and managed. For its introduction into common use for purposes of aerostation, we are indebted to Mr. Charles Green. Up to his discovery, the process of inflation was not only exceedingly expensive, but uncertain. 2 and even 3 days have frequently been wasted in futile attempts to procure a sufficiency of hydrogen to fill a balloon, from which it had great tendency to escape, owing to its extreme subtlety and its affinity for the surrounding atmosphere. In a balloon sufficiently perfect to retain its contents of coal gas unaltered in quality or amount for 6 months, an equal quantity of hydrogen could not be maintained in equal purity for 6 weeks. The supporting power being estimated at 2,500 pounds, and the united weights of the party amounting only to about 1,200, there was left a surplus of 1,300, of which again 1,200 was exhausted by ballast, arranged in bags of different sizes, with their respective weights marked upon them by cordage, barometers, telescopes, barrels containing provision for a fortnight, water casks, cloaks, carpet bags, and various other indispensable matters, including a coffee warmer contrived for warming coffee by means of slack line, so as to dispense altogether with fire, if it should be judged prudent to do so. All these articles, with the exception of the ballast and a few trifles, were suspended from the hoop overhead. The car is much smaller and lighter in proportion than the one appended to the model. It is formed of a light wicker, and is wonderfully strong for so frail-looking a machine. Its rim is about 4 feet deep. The rudder is also very much larger in proportion than that of the model, and the skew is considerably smaller. The balloon is furnished, besides, with a grapnel and a guide rope, which latter is of the most indispensable importance. A few words in explanation will here be necessary for such of our readers as are not conversant with the details of aerostation. As soon as the balloon quits the earth, it is subjected to the influence of many circumstances tending to create a difference in its weight, augmenting or diminishing its ascending power. For example, there may be a deposition of dew upon the silk, to the extent even of several hundred pounds. Ballast has then to be thrown out, or the machine may descend. This ballast being discarded, and a clear sunshine evaporating the dew, and at the same time expanding the gas in the silk, the whole will again rapidly ascend. To check this ascent, the only resource is, or rather was, until Mr. Green's invention of the guide rope, the permission of the escape of gas from the valve. But in the loss of gas is a brief proportionate general loss of ascending power, so that in a comparatively brief period the best constructed balloon must necessarily exhaust all its resources and come to the earth. This was the great obstacle to voyages of length. The guide rope remedies the difficulty in the simplest manner conceivable. It is merely a very long rope, which is suffered to trail from the car, and the effect of which is to prevent the balloon from changing its level in any material degree. If, for example, there should be a deposition of moisture upon the silk, and the machine begins to descend in consequence, there will be no necessity for discharging ballast to remedy the increase of weight, for it is remedied or counteracted in an exactly just proportion by the deposit on the ground of just so much of the end of the rope as is necessary. If, on the other hand, any circumstances should cause undue levity, consequent ascent, this levity is immediately counteracted by the additional weight of the rope upraised from the earth. Thus the balloon can neither ascend nor descend except within very narrow limits, and its resources, either in gas or ballast, remain comparatively unimpaired. When passing over an expanse of water, it becomes necessary to employ small kegs of copper or wood filled with liquid ballast or of a lighter nature than water. These float and serve all the purposes of a mere rope on land. Another most important office of the guide rope is to point out the direction of the balloon. The rope drags, either on land or sea, while the balloon is free. The latter, consequently, is always in advance when any progress whatever is made. A comparison, therefore, by means of the compass of the relative positions of the two objects will always indicate the course. In the same way, the angle formed by the rope with the vertical axis of the machine indicates the velocity. When there is no angle, in other words, when the rope hangs perpendicularly, the whole apparatus is stationary. But the larger the angle, that is to say, the farther the balloon precedes the end of the rope, the greater the velocity, and the converse. As the original design was to cross the British Channel and alight as near Paris as possible, the voyagers had taken the precaution to prepare themselves with passports directed to all parts of the continent, specifying the nature of the expedition as in the case of the Nassau voyage, and entitling the adventurers to exemption from the usual formalities of office. Unexpected events, however, rendered these passports superfluous. The inflation was commenced very quietly at daybreak on Saturday morning, 6th instant, in the courtyard of Wheel Vor House, Mr. Osborne's seat, about a mile from Penstruthal in North Wales. And at 7 minutes past 11, everything being ready for departure, the balloon was set free, rising gently but steadily in a direction nearly south, no use being made for the first half hour of either the screw or the rudder. We proceed now with the journal, as transcribed by Mr. Forsyth from the joint MSS of Mr. Monk, Mason, and Mr. Ainsworth. The body of the journal is, as given, is in the handwriting of Mr. Mason, and a PS is appended each day by Mr. Ainsworth, who has in preparation and will shortly give the public a more minute and, no doubt, thrillingly interesting account of the voyage.